Please take your Bibles with me, and would you please stand as you do and turn in them to the book of Exodus, chapter 25. That's on page 66 if you're using one of the pew Bibles. For this morning's reading, I'll be reading verses 23 through 30 of Exodus chapter 25. Would you please follow along with me as I read? You shall make a table of acacia wood. 2 cubits shall be its length, a cubit its breadth, and a cubit and a half its height. You shall overlay it with pure gold, and make a molding of gold around it. And you shall make a rim around it a handbreadth wide, and a molding of gold around the rim. And you shall make for it 4 legs of gold, and fasten the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. Close to the frame the rings shall lie, as holders for the pole to carry the table. You shall make the poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold, and the table shall be carried with these. And you shall make its plates and dishes for incense, its flagons and bowls with which to pour drink offerings. You shall make them of pure gold. And you shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me regularly. May the Lord add His blessing this morning to the reading of His word. You may be seated. As we consider the table in the tabernacle, in God's tent, remember that tabernacle is just the word for tent in the Bible, that there's not some differentiating spiritual word used for God's tent. It's merely a tent. This is God's tent, this is my tent, that's His tent. That's the idea that we have to familiarize ourselves with, because we can tend to sanctify the tabernacle in a sense that it was not meant to be, even though it was holy, and we'll get all into that. But we need to understand that God moved into the neighborhood. That's the idea. That's the significance of God's tent being in the midst of Israel. Within that tent, we consider the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of Covenant, and then today, this morning, we'll consider the table. I want to give a brief outline for this morning's study. First is an orienting joy. And then we want to talk about the partiality of the feast. Then we want to look at the feast in all its glory, or I should say in its glory. And then lives anticipating fullness. Orienting joy, partial feast, feast in its glory, and lives anticipating fullness. Let's consider first an orienting joy. Significant to understand that from the outset of creation, God tells us what creation is meant to be about. The very first few words, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the rest of chapter 1 is telling you the work that needed to be done on earth, which means that the heavens are complete. The heavens didn't need work. They're done. They're as they should be. They've arrived. Heaven looks just like it's supposed to. It's earth that needs transformed to mere heaven. So the rest of the Bible is about this collision between the perfect heavens and the incomplete earth. The earth yet needs work to mere heaven. So the rest of the Bible is about bringing heaven to earth, and guess how the Bible ends? Well, it comes, right? It comes. It arrives. So, right at the beginning, we realize that our history is about heaven being mirrored on us, on earth, on our surroundings. That's what it's about. But it gets more detailed than that. Because as you get into the days and as the days unfold, you look at day 4 and it says, "And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for," you say it. Oh, come on now. "Let them be for for days and years." But what I want to focus on are the signs and the seasons. The signs. Let them be for signs. How did the Magi make their way to Christ? According to the signs, right? So, the very atmosphere and all that's in them are meant primarily, they work for day, they work for night, but part of them, a big part of them, is to bring them to the Messiah. Right at the very beginning of Scripture, that indicates that something magical is going to happen toward that end. There'll be a star over the stable or over his home. But then it even gets more detailed than that, and our translations don't do us any favors. But the word for seasons is the actual Hebrew word for 3 times a year you shall come up for festivals, for feasts. That word for season is the exact same Hebrew word for festivals and for feasts. In other words, that when you come to celebrate God's celebrations, 3 feasts a year, primarily the big ones, that was crafted into creation when it first came to be. So the marking of the environment is all centered around God's festivals, His feasts, His celebrations. This is the idea that the rhythm of creation anticipates the intervention of God through signs and fellowship with God through the feasts. So, this is the idea that fellowshipping with God, that heaven coming to earth, is written into the fabric of creation. It's what it's all about. It's what Alistair Roberts will call our orienting feature. Fellowship with God is why we are here. That's the idea. But it's not just why we're here. It's also what is to be our truest joy. So this is the joy. Fellowship with God, eating at His table, trumps every other joy. So this is why Sabbath, or the Lord's Day, the first day of the week when Jesus was resurrected, is to just not just orient our lives. It's not just to be the thing on our calendar of which everything else on our calendar orbits. This is the day. This is the day. This is what it's all about. But it's also to be, this is the day I look forward to. One is duty, but it's to be combined with delight. It's to be a delight that manifests itself in duty. This is my thing. This is why we're here. This is what helps me navigate my life like the stars for a sailor. This is it. This is it. This is the feast. And that is written into the very beginning of creation. But God just doesn't stop there. The Torah itself is constituted of how many books? These are questions that if you don't answer right, it severely hurts my heart. How many books? 5 books. Okay, so let's talk about the 5 books. So we've got, let's do it this way. The first book of the Torah and the last book of the Torah are Genesis and Deuteronomy. Okay, so put them on ends. Genesis and Deuteronomy, the beginning and the end of the Torah. Okay? Well, then the next 2 in are Exodus and Numbers. Okay? So when you got 5 books, you have a middle book, do you not? Right? And the middle book of the Torah is Leviticus. Okay? Then, and this is not just me, this is many commentators have noticed this, okay? What is the center of Leviticus? Well, the center of Leviticus, not numerically, the chapters were inserted later, the chapter numbers were inserted later. The center of Leviticus, the literary center of Leviticus is chapter 16. And what happens in chapter 16 of Leviticus? the Day of Atonement. Okay? So the center of the Torah is the day that we are made, God's people are made one with God. So creation says, hey, here's what we're all about. You being one with God, you fellowshipping with God, you having those feasts and eating at His table. Then you step back and you look at the Torah, and you say the Torah, Genesis, Deuteronomy, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus is the central book. What's the center of Leviticus? The Day of Atonement. What's the Day of Atonement about? About becoming one with God. This is what it's about. Heaven is coming to earth. But then we have, when God starts saying, this is how the tabernacle is to be built, what does He start with? Well, He starts with heaven, as it were, because He starts in the Holy of Holies, and the object, the piece of furniture that He speaks of, is the one to be mostly aligned with Him, which is the Ark of the Covenant. That's heaven. And then the table is where earth meets heaven. It's where you fellowship with God. So the Bible is about fellowshipping with God. This is everywhere in the Scriptures, that we are here to fellowship with God. It's your most important feature. It's what your bodies were crafted for. It's what your joys were calibrated toward. Now you can try them out on anything else, and it'll be, like I've said before, me putting diesel in the church van engine. You can try taking your joy and putting it anywhere else and trying it out. And it might work for a while. The van drove for a while before it started smoking. Zach, stop laughing. That might be the first time you've heard that. But it worked until it didn't. And that's what it's like when we take our joy, calibrated for God, and put it on anything else. It'll work for a while. And it'll leave us empty and sad and embarrassed, maybe. So, this is seen, a fellowship with God is seen in the way He lays out His tabernacle. What I've said is that they actually built the tabernacle differently than God delivers them the items. But He gave them the items in a particular order to stress importance. So the Ark of the Covenant's first, the table is second. I am here to eat with you, to fellowship with you. It's why I made you. Okay? But it goes further than that. What we've talked about is that the tabernacle itself is mirroring, the layout of the tabernacle mirrors Sinai. Now we'll spend a sermon to dedicate some entirety to that, along with some other features that'll make it very clear that that's the point. But the idea is that Israel couldn't stay at Sinai. Sinai was in the wilderness. He's taking them to Canaan. He's taking them where they could live and have wonderful, beautiful houses and beautiful landscape and the land of milk and honey. He's taking them there, but He wants to take Sinai there with them. That's the idea. They can't just live in the wilderness. At least He doesn't want them to. They could. They lived there for 40 years just fine. But He wants to give them blessing upon blessing. And so He's going to take them to Canaan, but He wants them to take Sinai with them. And so Sinai, or the tabernacle, is what we've called God's tent, or an architectural mountain. It's Sinai laid down. It's a portable Sinai. And the significance of this is that God is taking His sort of picnic blanket everywhere they go. So they can put it down together and get out the basket and fellowship with one another. That's the idea. Why? Why is that so important? Because it's what you were created for. It's what I was created for. So, this is what I mean by our orienting joy. God and fellowship with Him is to be our orienting joy. I don't have the exact details of this. I have one for sure. So if you've heard the story before, just humor me, okay? Just recently, Becky was driving with Esther, and as they were, Esther's starting to learn the letters and learn the sounds of the letters, and this is the part that's a little foggy to me, but she began seeing words that she started knowing the letters of. So I think one of them might have been street, all right? And so she said S, street begins with S. She's sounding it out, and she knew that. And then something like park, and that's one I'm foggy on too. And it was like she understood that P went with park, and she's starting to spell in her brain. And the part I have for sure right is that she said, and then woad, like road, woad starts with W. And I say that to say that she began to get the inner workings of how to spell right, but then she used a misplaced feature in her brain, her little speech impediment at this point, and she used that to say, this is how you spell road. But that was wrong, of course. And it's very easy for us to say, yeah, the presence of God is the most important thing. That's the Ark of the Covenant, sure, most important thing. But then the next thing that's put in there is the table. So it's God saying, if this is the most important thing, if you quickly, cognitively say, I'm the most important thing that exists, then shouldn't the quick follow-up of that should be that you hang out with me? That you orient your life around me? If I'm the greatest being that ever was or will be, shouldn't that dictate every other feature of your life and organize it and prioritize it and have it be the thing you daydream about versus that and this and the other thing that you might want, but they're lesser desires. Like, shouldn't I occupy your mind and your heart and your longing? You read the Psalms and that's exactly what you find. And so, if you get the first things right, don't allow your misplaced desires or mispronunciations to dictate the second. So that's the first concept. Now I want to talk about a partial feast and what I mean by a partial feast. Well, again, as we've stressed, going throughout the Pentateuch, through the Torah, there's no misplaced word, there's no wasted ink. As Theophilus Institute will say, the Holy Spirit doesn't waste His breath. If it's in the Bible, there's a reason that's very important for you to understand why it's there. Now, we may not until we meet God sometimes, but that doesn't mean it's not important. It just means we don't get it yet. We should yearn and try to get it because there's meat there. We got to find it. It's still on the bone. We got to chew it. So, when it comes to his description of the table, we'll be discussing the dimensions and the where the poles go and things like that in a future sermon. But for right now, I want to focus on the fact that he talks about his table, and it's not just the table he talks about. He talks about his table, and he talks about plates on the table, or a platter on the table. He talks about dishes that will hold nice scents on the table. Remember, in a tent community, you had animals nearby, when animals smell, and so you'd have incense in your tent to soften the smell, to soften the odor. So he's got that. And the actual word for that is hand, by the way. Remember I said there's a lot of body parts mentioned in the tabernacle, like it represents a body, and we'll talk about that in the future. But the dishes are actually just Hebrew for hand. You'll have hands on the table, but it's the word for dish as well. Then you have jugs or jars, okay, with which to hold drink. And so here's all I want to mention those things for you is that he's got a table, he's got dishes, he's got platters, he's got something to scent the table, like you might have a candle in the middle of your table, and then he's got jugs with which to hold a beverage. And so I just want you to think about that for a moment, because when you have Thanksgiving meal or a Christmas meal or Easter, these are a lot of the things that you'd go to your hutch and pull out, or we'd go to our basement and pull up, and we'd set our table with it, and it would be as beautiful a table as we can make it, right? And we decorate, and this is essentially what God has. He has a tent, He has a table, and He has dishes for the table, and those dishes are particularly ornate. Now, on those dishes, or on that table, He sets bread. And it's called the bread of the presence. In Hebrew, it's literally the bread of the face. The bread of the face. And this will make a lot more sense next week when we talk about the lampstand, because the lampstand had candles on it. Remember, the tent was covered with several layers. So it was pitch black in there if you didn't have light inside the tent. You couldn't see anything. Very likely in the Holy of Holies, you literally couldn't see anything. It was dark, completely black. Okay? And that brings some other scriptures to light where the Lord dwells in darkness. Okay? So you see some of this in the tabernacle, but it's dark. And so you had a lampstand. And this lampstand, we'll find, is particularly has these lamps. And it says when you set it up, set it so that the lamps throw light in front of it. And it's set across from the table where the bread is. And the bread, there's 12 loaves. They represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And you have a lampstand on the other side that throws light towards the table. This is the idea. This is the bread of the face, the light of God represented in the lampstand. The lampstand is the only pure gold object in the holy place, so it's the most precious object in the holy place. It represents God, and so that lampstand representing God is throwing light on the bread, which is to say God is looking at you. He's with you. You're at this table, and He's with you there. He's eating with you, as it were. He's fellowshipping with you at this table. The table with the bread of the face. His face is present at this table. And of course, a lot of people say, okay, if you want to understand the tabernacle, you've got to read it from the lens of the New Testament. And that's all fine and good, and we should test everything off the New Testament. But what's frequently not said is you have to test the tabernacle by what comes before it in the Old Testament, not just the New. And what's come before is that you have Mount Sinai, where the elders, 70 of them, were invited to come halfway up the mountain and what? Eat in the presence of God. And so what the table in the tabernacle in the middle of Israel is doing is it's saying, hey, Israel, I'm inviting not just the elders. See, what are the elders? They're your representatives. I'm going to call you a nation of priests. You're invited to eat with me, to dine with me. It's why you're here, to live with me, to bring heaven to earth. This is what's happening. So my face is here. I'm with you. But why is it a partial feast? Well, what's significantly left out in this passage is what goes into the jars and the bowls. We're not told that. The bread goes on the table, 12 loaves. What goes in the jars? What goes in the bowls? This is a table, and this is a table for eating. Do you just sit down at the table and eat bread? Is that what your meal looks like? Well, it's not what God's is going to look like, but that's what it looks like here. We're just told about the bread. So what happens is as you read, God begins to unpack this a little bit more, and you'll find that the priests were to eat this bread every Sabbath. So they would replace these 12 loaves with fresh loaves every Sabbath. They'd exchange them, and then the priests themselves would be able to eat the 12 loaves that were on the table, and it would be their food. The priests also were eligible to eat from some of the sacrifices. So they would eat meat. So now you've got the priests eating before God with bread and with meat. The meal's starting to fill up, isn't it? Okay? But here's the catch. And this catch doesn't change throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. The jars and the jugs on the table, the bowls on the table, what we find as the Pentateuch fills itself up in Numbers 28. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead of my outline here. Is this. It's drink offering. So we know that those jars were meant for a drink offering because it said it in our text this morning. Its drink offering shall be a quarter of hin for each lamb. So what this is speaking to is that every morning and every night at twilight, the priests were to sacrifice a lamb in the morning, a lamb at night, and that was to be like the meat. Okay, the bread's already on the table, but then they were to take the quarter of hin from each for each lamb. In the holy place you shall pour out a drink offering of strong drink to the Lord. So here's where we understand what goes into the jars, what goes into the bowls. Strong drink. Some people speculate that that's beer. Some people speculate that that's strong wine. I think that it's aged and refined wine based on what we'll find in the prophets. Okay? So now you have the fullness of the meal. You've got bread. You've got meat, the lamb, and you've got drink. You've got wine. But it's not just any drink. It's the finest, I would argue, of wine. Okay? So now you have a picture of a full meal. But here's what's significant about the wine. The wine, what's supposed to happen with it? I'm not trying to be special here. Pour it out. Where? It doesn't really specify, but not in your belly. That's what we do know. It's poured out. The priests don't imbibe of the wine. They eat the bread, they eat the meat of sacrifice, but they don't drink the wine. Ever. Nadab and Abihu, they offer strange fire to the Lord, and guess what happens? They get consumed by the fire. What made them do that? Well, we get an indication. This is after they got burned alive, okay? Drink no wine or strong drink, you or your sons with you, when you go into the tent of meeting. So what did Nadab and Abihu probably do? They probably drank God's wine. Lest you die, it shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. Now, they can eat the bread, they can eat the meat, but they can't drink the wine. Priests can drink wine off duty, but they can't drink it in God's tent. Why? Why? That's the question. Why the partiality of the feast? That's the question. God has literally brought Israel out of Egypt and prepared a table before them in the presence of their enemies. He set the table. There's the bread, there's the meat, there's the wine, but they can't drink the wine. And there's even more partiality to the feasts. What is greater partiality? Well, the holy place was accessible only to the priests. The holiest place, the Holy of Holies, is only accessible to the high priest. How many times? Once a year. Okay? So only the priest could eat the bread. Only the high priest could go where the Ark of the Covenant was. But they could never eat or drink the wine. Now, this is where we need to talk about the particularity God gives to wine in the Bible. Okay? You remember, what do the Israelites bring back from Canaan after the spies go in for 40 days? But don't answer that question yet. How long did the spies go into the land? 40 days. What does that remind you of? How long did it rain with Noah? How long did Moses spend on Sinai? How long did the spies go into Canaan? Every time you see 40 days, your brain should think God's doing a new creation. He's doing a new creation. He did it with Noah. He's up to it with Moses. And then the spies spend 40 days. He's up to a new creation. All right, that's the first thing. Now, what did they bring back from Canaan? The text makes great note of it. Grapes. What do grapes make? Okay, so here's what we're finding, that conquering leads to wine. Just like conquering leads to the footstool of God where you kick up your feet, it also leads to wine. What did Noah do? Noah gets off the ark, okay? The first thing Noah does is he makes a sacrifice to God. What's the second thing he does? Plants a vineyard. Why? Because he just fought the war. It's feasting time. It's kick up your heels time. It's plant an orchard and make wine time. See, the symbolism of wine is after the battle's fought, you enjoy wine. It's a celebratory feature. In fact, you were commanded to bring wine to one of the feasts. Commanded. You couldn't not do it. If you couldn't bring wine, you had to buy it when you got there. You learn that in Deuteronomy. So wine is commanded by God. Why? Because wine is a feature of celebration. That's the idea. So now we're in a closer place to say, you don't trust me. Okay, that's okay. Let's go a little further, okay? Oh, wait, did I? Yeah. This is an example of it, right? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. What's in that cup? That's probably what's in that cup, okay? What can I base that on? See, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the prophets note that the priests couldn't drink the wine. That's why they make such a big deal about wine being featured when God's kingdom returns. Okay? This is the idea. It's a celebratory feature that the priests never partook of. And we'll explain why once we see these passages. On this mountain, Isaiah says, the Lord of hosts will make for all people a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine. This is probably the strong drink that was in the tabernacle. Of rich food full of marrow, of aged wine well refined. In that day, the Lord with his hard and great strong sword will punish Leviathan. This is another way to understand Satan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent. He will slay the dragon that is in the sea. In that day, a pleasant vineyard. Sing of it. I, the Lord, am its keeper. Every moment I water it, lest anyone punish it. I keep it night and day. This is to Judah, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. This is the grapes you didn't want anybody to touch. And he washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. This is Israel. When they hear this, they would be in horror. What? That, like I said when we went through Genesis, this passage, this prophecy is saying when Jesus returns, the grapevines will be the best ever. And you won't even mind if your animal eats them. It would be equivalent of starting a fire with $1,000 bills. That's what God is picturing here, and he does it through wine. Come, Isaiah 55, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine, and without money and without price, and milk without money and without price. Then shall come and sing aloud at the house, at the height of Zion, and they shall be radiant over the goodness of the Lord, over the grain, the wine, and the oil, and over the young of the flock and the herd. And their life shall be like a watered garden, and they shall languish no more. Then shall the young women rejoice in the dance, and the young men and the old shall be merry. I will turn their mourning into joy. I will comfort them and give gladness for sorrow. See, this is the idea. The priests couldn't drink the wine because their work was not done. Do you see? The feast had not yet come. The tabernacle is a taste of the table, but it's not the full feast yet. That's why they only eat the bread and eat the bread and meat and can't drink the wine. It hasn't been finished. This is why the author of Hebrews will make such a big deal that the priests never sat down. They stood all day long doing sacrifices. The battle wasn't won yet. This is the idea. Jeffrey Myers, commentator, will helpfully state that bread is alpha food and wine is omega drink. Bread is alpha food, it's the beginning food. Wine is omega, it's the ending drink. And so the priests were doing alpha work.